Good morning and welcome everyone. Today is Tuesday the 9th of June, and the reason I'm saying that in this webinar is because yesterday was a really important date for our interviewee Tania Bearsley of KEA New Zealand, because New Zealand was able to declare that it was coronavirus free. A really important date, and that had Monday there'd been no further active cases in New Zealand and 17 days since the last reported cases. So fantastic news for New Zealand, but I appreciate that brings with it a whole set of challenges having been through the lockdown. So first and foremost, Tania, welcome. Tell us a bit about yourself and where are you today?
Hi, Christine. Really wonderful to see you, my friend. And good morning, good evening to you. So yes, as I said, I work for KEA New Zealand, which is the Kiwi Expat Association, and I've had the privilege for the last 5 years to be the UK Europe Regional Director based out of London. I have ended up being one of the displaced expats in reverse style. I was in New Zealand in March for a 2-week holiday, part of my first ever empty nester holiday with my husband, and Google reminded me the other day I've only made it 50% around the world this year. I had intended to make my way back to the UK. But when we found ourselves in lockdown situation and heeding the warnings of both governments, because we are proud dual citizens, we decided to stay put and not put any pressures on anyone, and we had great safety and a network here to look after us in New Zealand. And then as the situation progressed, we've made the decision to unravel our London lives and to set up in New Zealand again. And you and I know, having spoken before, not the easiest of decisions to make, but actually we feel really blessed that we could make one. And so we're going to make the most of our new lives in New Zealand, but the UK will always be our other home, and we look forward to visiting it when we can. So that hasn't stopped my mission though with KEA New Zealand, which is all about connecting New Zealanders around the world. And so KEA was born out of the Knowledge Wave conference back in 2001. And it's all about creating high impact connections that benefit New Zealand. And it's all about enabling New Zealand's aspirations and connecting those with great people around the world who happen to be New Zealanders or friends of New Zealand. So every day we're on a mission to uplift our nation globally. And so it's quite an exciting mission to have been part of for the last 5 years. Hence our meeting, having a look at the amazing work that you do to support your expats around the world and businesses to the idea of what they can do with friends, and that they don't need to do this alone. And so, yeah, I'm here to continue that mission in some form from within New Zealand out to the globe. So pretty exciting.
And I imagine that piece you're saying about the global diaspora and high impact connections, Tania, that is even more important going forward. Those expats who are across the world you've been in touch with, are they reaching out, Tania, saying, well, what can we do next? What's the dialogue at the moment?
Yeah, and there has been increased communication. I suppose we're all living in quite digitally open worlds for those of us that have access. And so because we've got, a digital imprint of about 500,000 connections around the world, we are sitting in the space where we have a true global network. So whereas I was looking after UK and Europe, which to be honest was probably 90% of it within the M25 in the UK, we've sat here looking at where our members are around the world, and they're all, never in history before have we all been impacted by something at the same time, although in varying different degrees of situation. Obviously us now living in New Zealand in a level 1 life, which means we can go back to resume some kind of normal, but it also means that we've got a closed border. So we haven't got that free access of coming and going, whereas our friends around the world, where our members are living in very different levels of restrictions and health insecurity and awareness of living in quite a different situation. So over the last couple of months, we've very much been focused on helping our businesses where they are around the world, whether they've been businesses that have been born from New Zealand or New Zealanders who have created businesses where they are. Helping the displaced, so understanding where our members can get good sources of information around staying safe or getting home, and then trying to point some of our government fast decision making. They created an all government response mission here in New Zealand, which was then supported by some of our great business leaders. And those business leaders were coming to the likes of KEA to say, we're wanting to solve this problem. Say if we were to use vaccines or COVID passporting, or just even thinking about border access and some other things around respiration and so on, where are the experts around the world that we know? And so the government and our business communities were tapping into the likes of KEA to say, where are our expats? And so that's where we've done everything from making sure that people understood what their visa access were for their families to come in and out of New Zealand, through to our businesses on the ground, how they got the best access in, say, the UK to understand the furlough scheme, and then right through to our government wanting to understand around some of the swift decisions that NHS were making around some of the technologies in the background and getting the right people to talk across countries. So it's been really varied, the level of response that we've been able to contribute to as a community.
Yeah, but it's wonderful. We read so much about the value of diaspora, and we talk about the economic value of diaspora, but that economic, social and trade and health support that the diaspora can provide, that's a great example there from KEA. Tania, thank you for sharing that. So one of the key aspects that you and I have talked about before is about the trade and the imports and the trade links with New Zealand and across the world. You mentioned about borders being closed. What is the current government strategy around trade within New Zealand and the rest of the world?
Yeah. New Zealand signalled really quickly when they went about 11 weeks ago into their levels, explaining to the nation what the 4 levels look like. And within that, pretty quickly made a strong message around trade. And so set up the trade routes for Singapore and really just started to say, look, our trade partners are still really important to us. We still need to have goods moving around the world. And so New Zealand Trade and Enterprise worked really swiftly to create their marketplace. A marketplace is a platform for businesses to say, hey, I've got a shortage of this or an oversupply of that, or I need this person, or I need access to this information. And so it's the export industry helping each other to move their goods around or to understand where blockages are, and really to support each other in a way that they probably haven't before. Certainly having access to air freight was responded to pretty quickly as well, because we needed to still see goods moving in and out of the country. So there were many stories that would have seen around flights being commandeered for that purpose, and obviously we had flights available because transit and international travel ceased pretty much overnight. So the government worked really closely with business to make sure that we could still keep goods moving around the world. And then locally, the domestic economy, obviously we're going to start having those next waves of unemployment. So our WorkSafe scheme, where businesses are able to apply for funding to keep jobs and keep people working during lockdowns. So unlike the furlough scheme in the UK, New Zealand was still able to work. And so businesses could pay their people to do R&D work or keep business as usual going, or they were still contributing, and we didn't have that. Certainly some people lost employment, but we didn't have that great shock of seeing people lose jobs overnight. So now what we're starting to see in the last couple of weeks is numbers in the thousands being announced of certain roles being lost, and then trying to understand where we redeploy those people or support them through that process. So domestic economy, the message is really clear. Support local, travel local. There's 5 million of us, those that can move around the country. But at the same time, our export world is saying we've still got friends around the world that we're trading with. We've got future FTA agreements that will be kicking off with the UK at some point. So that international voice is still really important, and those partnerships are important. So it's a bit of a balance across messaging. Certainly, I think, like most countries, there's a strong voice to be advocating for buying the quality of local. So enhancing and encouraging businesses to grow, because we do have some magnificent products here that probably don't get the same visibility because of price point or access. So digitisation is being encouraged, getting people to move their products around. I mean, overnight there was a Facebook group started going Buy New Zealand Made with hundreds of boutique businesses being able to show their world-class products to the rest of the nation. And up until then, they really didn't have any visibility because they were just looking after their own local markets. So it's really varied. New Zealand has a really high percentage of SMEs that employ less than 20 people. They are the breathing breath of our nation. And although we have our high export earners and contributors, we really do have to look after that balance and ensure that jobs are moved around or retained, that we're buying and supporting local while being a little bit careful. And then the other complication is being aware that all of our friends are living in different situations at the moment, but the will of the world in commerce is that we still want to have things moving. So there's many initiatives happening across trade and enterprise, MB with innovation, and Callaghan, and keeping all of those environments going. Investing in the future, trade and enterprise have got funding to look at the transformation of business and understanding where we can't get on planes as readily, right, to be getting in front of our prospect customers and clients and partners. So how do we do that without getting people on planes? So there's a lot going on in a really short space of time.
Yeah, and a lot previously, Tania, you mentioned before about government pulling in commercial insights and reaching out to those in business saying, hands up, this is an area where we need support. Is that
absolutely
continuing?
Yeah, and so the government is leading its voice into the business sector and relooking at its business councils, contributing to with this Vision Week happening in New Zealand this week, where we've got a lot of people thinking around what the future of our nation and the future of the world is going to look like. So I suppose we are in a unique position where we are sitting here celebrating. I mean, apparently the Prime Minister did a little happy dance that hasn't been recorded, but I think I've seen a few interpretations go out into the media since. So there has been a moment of celebration, but that's only really about safety and security of our people. We are very aware of the long road ahead around what's going to be needed to keep moving the nation forward and towards thriving again. So I suppose some people are still in survival and figure it out mode, and then others are really just trying to, I suppose the overcoin word of pivot, but it's a real reality where people are having to rethink how they offer their services and products, or how they move their technology in such a way that it's of use for today. So the government is key in that. We've obviously had our budget announced a couple of weeks ago, so really strong indicators there around the investment in business. Tourism, which I know we're going to come to, I think some elements we're feeling a little bit disappointed there around that initial funding, but those are conversations that are going to be ongoing as we look at how we diversify our tourism sector, and then also across our environment and infrastructure and education, and all of those things are equally important. So that, you know, it's a whole country and a whole government response. It's a big piece of work, and yes, New Zealand's celebrating, but it knows that it needs to lead the way, and we have an opportunity to take a breath and do some things differently. It's sped up some conversations, and I think there's a little bit of fear that some people are going to try and push back to what was normal back in February, but it's not, because our trading partners and those that we work with outside of our borders are sitting in a different position than us.
There's so many similarities in what you were saying there with Scotland and New Zealand, and, you know, having had the absolute privilege of visiting your country, I can see why so many Scots did end up, why we ended up at the most southernmost point in Eden. You know, it's like you're going to fall off the world there. But, you know, so many similarities, size of population, the structure of your islands, and tourism being such a strong commercial sector in New Zealand. I'd suggest if you could talk a wee bit more about what is happening specifically within the tourism industry. Yes, it's good to say spend your holidays local, although you're in the winter season now, but other support or voices are being heard within the tourism sector, Tania?
Absolutely, and our tourism sector was going through a relook at itself anyway prior to COVID. I know that you know, from my understanding, having a look at ecotourism, having a look at value over volume, and really starting to have a look at some of those other niche areas that New Zealand has as tourism products and how to best serve those up to the world. There has been an immediate response around some cash flow into those tourism businesses to be able to support them. And then there is also I'm just having a look at a note that I wrote because I was reading earlier before our call. So there is a strategy being designed by the government where I suppose some of our tourism treasures, we don't want to lose them. And so how do we work and look after those until such time that we start to see the volumes come through? Then you've got the likes of towns like Queenstown, where, you know, 3 million people would come a year to prop up, you know, a city that's got 40,000 occupants, and they are really sitting there figuring out, okay, New Zealand does support us, we love our skiing and it's a beautiful part of the country to be. How do we make it accessible and affordable to some of New Zealand? And how do we welcome them down here? Because there will be a lot of Kiwis that haven't made their way down that south. So that domestic tourism conversation has been hit here really quickly and almost overnight. And it's really important. We do need to be moving around the country and supporting that. But I know that many of them will be adding some of their voice to the Trans-Tasman bubble. If we start to look at the tourist numbers that come from Australia, is the biggest conversation that I'm seeing around the tourism sector. So there is how do we help those businesses that can hold on? Won't surprise you to know there's been quite a few quite high numbers of redundancy within the tourism sector. So that immediacy of how do we redeploy these amazing individuals that are great faces of New Zealand into work that's meaningful for them? How do we preserve some of these businesses that we really need to hold on? And then how do we look after the tourism treasures and make sure that we don't lose them? And then how do we work towards a best solution around incoming tourism through a Trans-Tasman bubble? With that comes a little bit of risk. I think I read a statistic today, you know, it's a 5% hole in our economy, putting 95% of the rest of the country at risk if we don't welcome in people who are safe. You know, we've created a COVID-free fortress, but within that comes some risk when you're bringing people in. So it's early days, and we've got some fantastic leadership within Tourism New Zealand. We've got great leaders within the tourism sector. It's the one thing that people come to New Zealand to do. They come to New Zealand for a bit of adrenaline, to see the land, to experience, to me, the terroir of the world in one nation. But when they leave, it's the people that they remember. So we understand that, and it's how do we hold on until we have clearer view. So I'm sure we would all love to have crystal balls at this point to know what that's going to look like. And there will be some businesses that don't weather this, and it makes us all feel desperately sad. But how do we buoy those big thinkers on and those providers into a future where they're giving? So ecotourism, I think, will be a big shouting out. Sustainability will be that other voice. So really looking at that, heading back to that pure New Zealand voice that we've had for a long time, kind of sitting within that. Then having a look at niche tourism, and then really starting to understand, you know, the goal will be to have borders open again, and we're not having to make some of those predicted choices around exclusive access to countries. We still want to have a free country that's available to all. So it's something that I'm watching really closely, because it's the one product where people truly do taste our nation. Like you, they come into it and they experience it. So I'm looking forward myself being a tourist at home. I grew up a child of the 70s and the 80s and 90s, I think it was. There was a campaign, don't leave home until you've seen the country. And they're reinvigorating that in a way and reminding us of the beauty that we have on our doorstep. And the way that I see that is that's for now. And then what we'll do is we'll create these other advocates for our tourism sector, because we've all sampled it and tasted it. I think there's, you know, even some resistance around opening a Pacific bubble straight away, because that tourist money would go into the Pacific, which they need, rather than being spent here. So it's that fine line of giving people that freedom, giving people access, opening the world up again, but also trying to support our own. So, but I'm looking forward to exploring and getting outside of the Wellington region.
Absolutely, beautiful region as it is. Just one final question then, as we are starting here and in the UK to open doors and to open back into offices, etc. What was the experience in New Zealand as doors started to being open to commercial premises, and what advice can you share to our business leaders here at Scottish Business Network?
I know that in New Zealand there was a lot of frustration between level 2 and 1 because of our numbers over the last week and a half. People have been desperate to have that through, and I think it was more of a mental state more than a physical reality. So around advice, it's a tough one because I know you're living under living under very different schemes and strategies as to how to open back up into the community. So the big difference for us is now we can have public gatherings without social distancing. Rugby kicks off this weekend, so we're going to have full stadiums again. So it's probably done great things for the world of rugby. So I know there'll be lots of rugby fans around the world envious of people sitting within these stadiums. It's really good for our food and beverage and hospitality sector. So performers can start performing their arts again, and we can get the restaurants full, because in level 2 you were social distancing, so you had tables, several arms away from you, and felt a bit vacuous. And we go out to dine because it's a social experience. So what I can say is that as the levels do start to open up and you are able to return some of your business and to your public, if you can do so, I know it's not always cost effective for some people to open their doors to limited numbers, but I know that it's started to build up a lot of goodwill in the community again, and the desire for people to go in and see their businesses again. So if you can find a way to engage with your community, whether it be through open doors or social media, keep doing that, because the will of communities and the will of people is to be back into some of these experiences that they loved pre-lockdown and COVID. And then also be honest about what you need as business owners. We're all in this together. So don't think you need to be afraid to say, look, we really need some bums on seats in order to be here for you in a couple of months' time. And so we've got a lot of our businesses. There was an SOS business and cafe scheme set up here the minute level 4 happened, set up by some individuals as a non-profit, which just enabled cafes and businesses to list themselves, and then fans or consumers of their product could buy a voucher and redeem it in the future. So I've got a couple of vouchers in hand that I'm looking forward to using to say to a business, we really, with the will of the world, we wanted you back. We're glad that you're here. So don't know if I can give any advice other than keep communicating to your customer, keep looking after them, and edge them back in with you as you can open. And, the Scots are social lot, just like Kiwis. A lot of us got those attributes from our ancestors. So celebrate when you can come back together again and have some fun. And there's nothing quite like a big hug when you're allowed to do it. So it is worth the wait. I wish that I had a simple fix, but we're into day 1, and there will be some people, there are some people who are quite happy working from home now, and there are businesses that will keep doing that for their teams for a period of time. And I think the way of working has changed for many people, and some for the good. And then also there's been some discussion around the 4-day working week here in New Zealand as well, a conversation that's been struck up over the last year or two. But a lot of people having a look at New Zealand's productivity. If people had earned the same amount of money but worked less hours, they've got more time for themselves, their family, community, but also to travel. So starting to have a look at how do we do things a little bit differently. So a lot of things happening in tandem here. But weddings can start happening and people can start celebrating together. And
It's good to hear, and we've been so blessed and having these friends around the world, Tania, who can tell us the different steps here, and it's wonderful to get your insight. And as you say, there's still a long way to go, but the journey has just started today. And despite the sadness and the deaths that we have had to record in New Zealand and globally, there are the next steps there, Tania. It's a joy as always to see it. My sadness is that despite COVID, I still won't be able to see you, Tania, but I know that the blog will continue, as you say, through this, the benefits of being digitally connected. So Tania, it's always a joy to see you, Stay safe and stay well, and thank you for sharing your insights today. Take care.
Thanks, Christine. Great to see you.